So this morning, I'm going to go over the sociological understandings of education, specifically the two theoretical perspectives at functionalism and conflict theory. These two opposing theories both generate very profound insights of social mobility. And then the second part of this class this morning, I want to take any questions for those final essays, which this deals with it. The first question deals with meritocracy and talent and effort. In stratified societies, this is a question on your final essays as well, of course, on education and upward social mobility. And when you have a hierarchical society with a stratified system, right, of social rewards, remember with hierarchical societies, it kind of determines who gets what and why, where the starting point up is. And trends in social mobility. The whole goal of the ordering of a society is to allow for patterns of upward social mobility, no matter where you end up in a stratified system, and to get people in groups on the treadmill of the political economy, right? Moving upwards, working, getting those education credentials. And for a long time with education, it's garnered a lot of sociological attention because of the wider context of persistent systemic problems of income inequality, especially, and kind of the existential threats that poses to patterns of mobility. And this is important because it's very important for several reasons for education to do that, to provide that. That's the great equalizer in American society that we've, really hold treasure. It's kind of an unspoken, truth that you work hard, you play by the rules, you get an education, you stay out of trouble for the most part, work hard, and the system will reward you, based on your effort, and it'll work out. Recently, these patterns have kind of stalled a little bit, and the gains and going like this, right? And remember, we looked at Robert Putnam's research when we went from a we society where inequality was kind of going like this, and then it took off again in the 80s, and it skyrocketed in the last couple of years. Very, very evident in the pandemic, right? Who are the winners and the losers? And it was very, very stark, kind of wake up call of some of this stuff, especially dealing with social inequality and income inequality and education and upward social mobility. And that's what you want. You want people on that treadmill of the political economy, educated, right? Working, paying taxes, been getting involved in community, volunteering if you can, having kids, and producing, right? And this thing is supposed to work. So the functionalist perspective on this, on education, is the meritocracy argument, right? The education is a means to social mobility, right? That, it will reward talent and effort, right? And those patterns of upward mobility, you get in what you get out, right? And that the schooling generally does that, and they look at education as a way of socializing and getting people socially integrated. Okay, now with the functionalist perspective, okay, remember, they look at a stratified society and they're looking at inequality as it's inevitable, it's always going to be there, right? How you fix that is by producing at the bottom and making kind of, like your free enterprise system work for those at the bottom, and give them, opportunity through, socialization and schooling and social integration, and also social placement. Okay, this is functionalism. Remember that education should, and this, we're talking about public education, higher education is a whole nother bag. The education should offer social placement or sorting, right, to ensure, right, social and cultural innovation, right? Now, this is where it gets kind of controversial, right? And in this kind of the conflict theorists counter with this. Education should, determine at a certain part, and other societies do this, more, obviously, where people have to take national tests at third grade, sixth grade, especially the former colonial British systems. And they sort people, right? And schools, basically should do this. They should sort, the kids that are really innovating, the really smart kids from the kids that, are kind of struggling with school, with test scores and whatever, right? And that schools should kind of sort and place these things and work with these students that you need to make to ensure that culture and social innovation, right? That you give them, and keep them. Teachers can't teach to multiple intelligences and multiple academic, progress and things like that. For this, the smooth ordering and functional, mechanisms of society, right? So what they say, is kind of around, high school, they should start, kind of earmarking certain students, and they should be, work towards whatever type of track. Basically the kind of theory is not everyone, needs to go to college, right? And schools should do a better job at identifying that, functionalists would say there's too many people going to college, right? Credentialing societies and things like that. To ensure, right, that these jobs are filled, right? So with functionalism, an example of that is where you have these big gaps in job vacancies, really well-paying jobs that in plumbing and welding and some of the vocational trades, they don't have the high status type of title, but they offer a lot of economic rewards and a pattern into the middle classes, are not getting these students, right? And this is kind of a spatial mismatch with that. Functionalists will argue that, like, listen, okay, well, we got to make sure, right, to build for a we society, that there's certain education and skill set, taught and identified and things like that. Some, are going to be skeptical of that. That sounds kind of a little like social engineering to conflict theorists, right? That you're limiting the potential of large groups of students, especially working class and poor students who, unfairly often get sorted and socially placed into those, less academic demanding tracks, that don't prepare you for college. And they push these students into these colleges, then colleges have to remediate and reteach these, basic skills in high school and stuff like that. And it's a big mess. Colleges have to they spend like anywhere between $3 to $4 billion a year with a B, remediating, basically reteaching, high school stuff that the public schools weren't teaching. So, what you have is, so the conflict theorists say, what this is this meritocracy argument, that people catch on at different times. I was one, and I didn't really excel until I got to college. I was bored with school. I just found the curriculum very boring, and I was interested in kind of real life learning, reading outside the classroom, experiential type of learning, immersive, right, type of learning. So, what conflict theorists said, that there's this tracking that happens, and it's, they counter the functionalists with this social and cultural or innovation and social placement and social integration and sorting, really is just a nice politically correct way for kind of social engineering and kind of, separating groups and pushing that you need to make sure that you provide these avenues for, especially the kids that get unfairly tracked, the kids in the lower classes, right? In tracking work, schools don't openly acknowledge that they do these things, but they do. Tracking, right, is based on, you've probably heard of that, if any of you are going into education. And tracking kind of works like an escalator, right? If you're placed in the lower tracks, you get placed in the lower tracks on, say grades, standardized tests, which is another thing we'll talk about. Teacher evaluations, and a lot of times kids get arbitrarily tracked into lower tracks where they're less demanding academically, and they have the academic rigor as the upper tracks. There's tons of studies that show some of this, the teachers' recommendations are kind of biased. There's things like politeness and neatness and all these type of things that kind of, implicitly go into tracking students. So it kind of works like this. If you're in the higher tracks, you got unlimited opportunities in schools, right? If you're placed in the lower tracks, the kids, especially that do worse in these studies, and just countless studies, start off here and they gradually go down like that, right? And then the kids in the lower tracks are just going uphill the whole time, right? Now, parents can demand, right? That's that cultural repertoire, that you get your kid in those upper tracks. If they start tracking, they do this around middle school, right? Get them in there, get them the extra help, work with, the tutors and things like that. You have a right to get them, but often parents, especially working class parents who have juggling jobs and, all types of life limitations or whatever, right, that we all go through. Usually it will just go along with school officials, right? The people that make these decisions. And this is an avenue where it reproduces the class structure, because when you look at the data on this, the middle and upper class kids get into those upper tracks, and the kids, in the lower middle classes and the underclass tend to get tracked in the lower. And it's not because they don't have the potential. They all have the potential. We talked a little bit about that with the breakpoint theory, with I forget the name of the scholar, Ken Robinson talked about this breakpoint and beyond, where we all start off with that genius level, right? And for the most part, right, they tested these students and it usually, right, declines, right? And you would think that people start off not as smart, right? And then they get smarter. But what you find with them, especially American school kids, they start off with that genius level in kindergarten, first grade, and you see this kind of decline. Different, a different rabbit hole to go down to with that. So you have also, things like with standardized testing, mass testing. Schools generally, evaluate students based on, a standardized test. Students are batterized with tests. We talked about this with the standardization of society, right? With mass testing, George Ritzard's theories of McDonaldization. The average student will take, anywhere between 110 and 120 standardized tests between their kindergarten and 12th grade, right? That's one way to determine someone's potential and their intellectual, capacity, right, for, knowledge and academic, pursuance. Testing's just one. There's all types of other ways to measure this with experiential learning, immersive learning, with a whole host of other things. It's critical thought and inquiry, discussing ideas, essays, putting your thoughts on paper, working with two opposing ideas and insights and kind of, work out those difficulties and occupy that space, right, of the other, right, and to see those possibilities, right, things like that. And the other area, conflict theories point to reproducing social inequalities, is what they call the hidden curriculum, right? A lot of research on this, where a lot of kids just don't do that well with all the written rules and the kind of the paternalistic type of authority teaching, I'm teacher, you're the learning, I taught it, you didn't learn it, bad for you, bad mark, whatever, right? The bells ringing off, and kind of that structured, if you get in trouble or you're a little late for track, you have to go to the principal's office. All these type of little things kind of nitpick at students, and it kind of turns students off from education, right? The other area is schools are just one way to be educated, right? It's not the sole mechanism of education. There's so many different ways. Schools have not innovated in the last probably since the 1970s when I started public schooling. They still are teaching this very same curriculum, and this is a problem. Other societies don't do this mass testing thing. When I was in the Netherlands, I was in a seminar, and one guy from Amsterdam says, the problem with your system is you give tests, we don't give tests. It's quite simple. Can we all go and leave the seminar now? And he was right. They just do a lot of kind of project-based group stuff. They don't, you really deal with tests. No societies do that. Now, here's the real kicker. On international comparisons, right? Our students rank towards the bottom of every academic category: reading, math, science, critical thinking, language. We're not even in the top, quintile of that. I mean, these are even our top students in international comparisons. So you look at that school systems that really do, are towards the top. The Netherlands is one, Finland, South Korea, Japan, Germany, and some of these other societies, to name a few, because we're kind of stuck in the 20th century. But conflict theorists will say, this is really an outmoded mode, that schools haven't really innovated and kind of moved in the 21st century. And the pandemic really forced them to innovate, and everyone was kind of caught off guard with this, especially schools. And I would argue, in large part, some universities and colleges. And the other area with conflict theorists that produce that limits the potential groups and limits the upward social mobility, right? And getting groups, and especially people that belong to groups that suffer group disparity and things like that. A la your Cornel West and Adolph Reed Jr. and some of these scholars, Glenn Lowry, is school funding, right? Property taxes. You have rich and poor, school districts. Schooling in America is largely based on local and state property taxes. That's where you see these just very glaringly obvious forms of social inequality, right? You see it in the facilities. Some of the schools of the rich upper class, not even the wealthy rich. I mean, the upper class students, in some of these suburbs, look like small, fancy, private liberal arts colleges, out east that cost $30,000 to get an education. And then you drive a couple miles, right? And you see schools that barely have enough textbooks. The facilities haven't been updated. There's all types of stuff. Jonathan Kozol wrote a book called Savage Inequalities on all this type of stuff. Functionalists would agree with that. It's like, yeah, we got to kind of fix this type of stuff. And, how do you do that, right? Because when you get into a society that's kind of more based on a me, right? And taxes and things like that, and redistributing tax monies and things like that, it becomes a very contentious issue. Different issue, different, flats for graduate studies course in education and social problems. If you get into that, it's a problem. And again, this limits the potential because kids get stuck in these, often the kids that, do worse in these places, the school will end up, warehousing them. There's a scholar by the name of Robert Balfans at Johns Hopkins looked at this. And found, and I mean, here's an education scholar, and concluded that you have about 3,000 to 4,000 dropout failure factories or dropout factories in America, where you have poorly underfunded elementary schools, pushing these kids into poorly underfunded middle schools, into severely underfunded high schools, right? And it kind of stacks the decks against them. Plenty of people persevere in these places, but this is an ongoing problem. And these, both theoretical positions, functionalism and conflict theory, have insights on social inequality, right? And this is where you're looking at with social stratification. And it's not just one side. There's kind of mid-range theory where you got to borrow from both. Schooling is very high, very politicized of late. It's embedded in the culture wars. It's always been a contentious social issue with education and schooling, and really, the overall, potential of American society and the American political economy. And we got competition now. We're not number one like we used to for a long time after World War I. And we're not we're not producing the students we used to on an international scale. And in the globalized society, that's a big problem, right? Because America in the last 20 years and 30 years especially has had to go to other parts of the world for students, college graduates especially, to fill positions that American school students aren't prepared for, or don't have the qualifications for that. So, these are these two different things with this last theme, or the last, part of this class on stratified societies and American systems of stratification. There's a big chasm that conservative and liberal intellectuals, will agree on income inequality, that it's very stagnant for the political economy. It's very dysfunctional for groups of getting acclimated and involved, especially with education. When you have that growing like this, everyone loses. So the whole deal is we got to start going this way if we're going to fix these issues, and especially with our fate of our nation, really, economically, and for future generations. Questions on any of that stuff? Makes sense? Following me?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Jolene, I got the only camera on. Everyone else is cameraless. Yeah, so I mean, we're all players in this, aren't we? Myself included, and I kind of interjected. I went over and didn't catch out until I was older. And a lot of people do. A lot of times students don't, when they don't get that aha moment, until their first or second year college, and that's where you see people take off. And often those were students that were tracked in the lower. Education's a way out. And when we start making people, parents and students believe that, that we all have that quality of mind to, get on that treadmill of the political economy, you've heard me say that several times this semester, we all benefit, and we know that, this polarization and what's happening now in societies, and this has got to come, Richard Ford, a sociologist, called it the Great Reset, that we're heading towards. Whether that's occurring now is kind of a big sociological debate, but some scholars are saying, yeah, we're heading toward this. So there's a lot of reframing of this stuff going on. Now, this all relates to these questions on your final essays. And, I want you to borrow, and if there's anything you get from this class is that, what we do in the social sciences and liberal arts is that, we get you outside of your head, and the sociological imagination especially teaches this, where you put yourself and you occupy, someone else's lived experience or someone else's shoes and see different perspectives, right? To be objective neutral, right? To check your groupthink, to check your confirmation bias, some of those things we talked in class. And do that hard intellectual work, that the traditional liberal arts, because the only way these societies can work, and this is why we're all here with education, right, is to provide a better future for ourselves, our future generations, through education. So that first question deals with kind of American ideologies on talent and effort. When you're able to remove yourself and occupy someone else's space and look at things from their perspective, it's kind of a complicated dance. When you in sociology and the liberal arts, whether it's philosophy, literature, and things like that, you're doing that, right? And you don't realize it until sometimes after you leave college, what it does to your cognitive thinking when you're able to do that. That can't be measured with a test, right? And that's a very enlightening thing. So you get into the stratification stuff. Place your theoretical position either in functionalism or conflict theory, right? If you're going to take the functionalist side, you say, look, inequality is not necessarily a bad thing. And here's why. Conflict theorists would take the opposing view on this. If you look at say functionalism would say, a rising tide lifts all boats. You get in what you get out. That inequality is always going to be there. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It encourages people to work hard, and the free enterprise system basically works, and it has. And there's all types of examples of that. Conflict theorists take the opposing view. They all both of them would also agree on social inequality, that it's very dysfunctional for society, especially economically. And you're seeing this with inflation and all types of crazy things going on right now. So conflict theorists are going to say stratified society limits the potential of certain groups. It creates group disparities, so on and so forth. And you could kind of discuss and bat around some ideas in that essay on, is it desirable? Okay. We looked at the conflict perspective on education a little bit. Compare and contrast that to the functionalist perspective. Okay. Now, if you can do that, and you can be very creative with that question, which I like. I like when you guys go deep in your essays. Basically those countries that are the top number one students, the Netherlands, where I had the opportunity and privilege to go and teach a little bit and watch what they do. They openly sort. They take a qualifying exam at 12 years old, and the government says determines whether you're going to be prepared. It's going to prepare that 12-year-old kid for university, right, or mid-level type of colleges, where they teach, say, nursing, education, business, or they call it finance. University level is, to be a professor or engineer or scientist or engineers and stuff like that. Or you're going to be tracked into, say, a community college, right? And no matter what you say, oh, my kid, he'll work harder. I want him to go to university. The government says no, that he needs to take these classes, and when he gets to, say, the college level, if he wants to go to university, right, he can try and work his way up. Or if he's tracked into a community college, he can work his way up. But they determine why they openly, basically, socially engineer. Right? They just don't hand you a college degree after completing the coursework, right? after just taking the classes and checking things off. And, a lot of those university systems and college systems throughout the world, you take a final, oral and final, written test on what you learned through those 4 years. So, functionalists would point to that, it's like, there's too much emphasis on credentialing. And then C. Wright Mills's power elite theory on that. Now, that stuff on race, that lecture specifically kind of looked at how race and class work and how race has been used to hide class, especially with politics. That film, The House I Live In, dealt with that. These categories are just social constructs, right? They have no meaning outside of systems of stratification, right? And this has happened, historically, politically, economically. We looked at like that with the Chinese, with groups from Mexico, Irish, that those Eastern Europeans who were treated as non-white, subjugated the same way, blacks who were coming up from the South, during the early 1900s, your Greeks, your Jews, a lot of your Slavic countries, your Poles, your Irish, all these groups were subjugated and villainized, if you will, and blamed as the problem. So, I think there's a lot of messages in when you study this with race, class, and politics, and what we can learn with that, and provide really some context to, and healing in some of these areas. And then here's some bonus stuff that was kind of webbed into each lecture throughout the semester. C. Wright Mills and that's what social theory does. This is a introductory class in social theory, right? We're not interested in saying, this is good or this is bad. We're more interested in what, theory best explains social phenomena, of course, through systematic and structural research, and data and these things. And being objective and neutral free, look at things through multiple perspectives. Very important. But Mills, in his theory, what good theory does is, describe and also sometimes predict. He predicted this trend with power, especially amongst very elite circles. And then his 5 areas of social problems that he outlined that were going to kind of be a persistent drag on American society. Alienation, when people are cut off either from jobs or opportunity. Social isolation is the cause of a lot of social problems. I'm teaching a social problems class. Some of you, I think, have signed up for it the second 8 weeks. If you want to kind of go part 2 to this class, it's going to be the same way, kind of a virtual Zoom type of thing. Moral insensibility, that, the kind of the gradual decline in cultural morals and kind of this very polarizing society. All types of threats to democracy with income inequality and power and things like that. And, put limiting potential on, freedom and upward social mobility. And then just mass bureaucracy, right? So those are kind of bonus, go for it questions. Remember, I like you to stack it deep, There's not really a wrong or right answer. I want you guys really just to occupy these questions and these ideas we've studied this semester, right? And do that, sociology, right? That we've all been studying, move around, look at ideas, take them apart, link it back to other ideas, right? Link it back to things we talked about, with groupthink, look at things. That's where you, and get it down. I'm not that hard of a grader, but just, get on there and explore, think of these essays as a canvas. Okay. Questions on any of this? Did everyone feel confident on these?
Is the bonus required to be on the final essays?
I'm sorry, Jolene.
Is the bonus required to be on the final essay?
No, it's not required to do it, you know. I'll add it on to points, you know, if you miss some points throughout the semester, you know, if you do that, you know, I'll add it on to. So,
Okay.
other questions on anything? This is due, put the due dates there. I sent out a message on all that. You know, I'm sure most of you have been working on these after each lecture, so go through there and just kind of clean up your ideas and your analysis. It's due on December 6th, okay? Other questions, anything? All right, if you want to hang out a little more this morning, I have the room open. You can hang out in the room and ask me questions one-on-one. If you need help outside of between now and the essay, please send me email. If you need to have a Zoom meeting to explain something, a lot of times I can explain things in an email. I'm good about getting back to my students. So, all right, well, you're free to go if you want to hang out. I'll keep the room open for a little bit. Best of luck to all you in your intellectual and life pursuits. Remember, sociology is a martial art. It's your best defense.
Have a good one.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jolene.